Nick Norwitz recently made a video called How Much Sleep Do You Actually Need? Where he explains very well why sleep quality actually matters. But the title actually asks another question. How much sleep do you actually need? I'm a PhD researcher working at the intersections between sleep, neurobiology and music therapy, and I think the answer is much more interesting than just 8 hours. For most adults, between 7 to 9 hours is a sensible target, but sleep need varies between each person. For instance, there exists naturally short sleepers that have a rare hereditary genetic trait. If you don't know if you have those gene variants, you don't know if you personally are okay with short sleeping. So let me help you estimate your sleep need. There's something that's important to know is if you are doing catch-up sleep. So this is in the weekend, for instance, you decide to sleep a bit longer. So that extra sleep is informative whenever you decide not to use an alarm and you get to sleep a bit longer than your regular sleep. So what you need to do is take a note of your habitual weekday sleeping timing. So what time do you go to bed and what time do you wake up at? How many hours does that accumulate? So you get that timing in hours, and do the same for your weekend sleep. And so you can do a very simple weighted average where you do 5 times your weekday sleep hours and 2 times your weekday sleep and divide that by 7. However, this simple formula has an important limitation, which is that in the weekend you may not actually be recovering fully your sleep debt. And we'll talk about sleep debt recovery in a bit, but what you can do is still use that formula. It can be informative and try to stick your results to something like a half-hour interval. Don't go precisely like 7 hours 26, 7 hours and a half or 8 hours, just round it up. What you could do is take your weekday sleep hours and add up the difference between your extra hours compared to your weekend hours and divide that by 2. Just dividing by 2 is just a general way of assessing how much sleep need, because when you're doing catch-up sleep, we'll talk in a bit about it in more detail, you may be sleeping extra hours, which is called sleep rebound, which is not necessarily your optimal amount of sleep. So that's one formula if you want to be a bit more precise. I think this has a bit more generous numbers than the previous simpler formula. And the third way to figure out your sleep need is to sleep unrestrictedly for several nights in a row. If you have the possibility of sleeping a long time with no alarm, this is one of the best ways you can figure out how much you actually need. But you have to do it for at least 4 nights consecutively. And once you realize that your sleep duration stabilizes, for instance, by the 5th night, you actually don't differ that much compared to the 4th night, there is an indication of how much sleep you actually need. You could do this in your holiday times, but maybe don't do it while you're going to travel somewhere because you might feel guilty for not going out and being a tourist or visiting somewhere. So maybe find a hotel nearby and take that week off just for a sleeping retreat. Now, why is this the best way to figure out? It's because of what is called sleep extension, which is an intervention. Particularly this study by Kitamura and his colleagues. In this study, they asked sleepers that slept habitually 7 hours, roughly, to stay in bed for 12 hours over the period of 10 days. And what happened is that in their first night of extension, they slept about 10 hours, 0.6. So that's an extra 3 hours than their normal sleep. But eventually their optimal sleep duration, what they actually needed, turned out to be 8 hours, because eventually by the 4th night, sleep duration was reducing and stabilized at 8.4 hours at the group level average. So their first night is not their actual sleep need requirement, it's sleep rebounding, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second. And this 3-hour rebound was approximately therefore equivalent to an estimated 1 hour of sleep debt, which took 4 days to resolve. So this is why one weekend lie-in may not be enough to tell your true sleep need, especially if you are using also an alarm. Now, if you don't have enough sleep, like in the cases of habitual sleepers, you have sleep debt, I mentioned, and your brain generally, when it gets the opportunity to sleep again, it tries to recover the sleep stages that it requires most. So you might be familiar that sleep is not one thing, it has at least 4 stages. There's light sleep roughly, there's deep sleep, and there's also REM sleep. So when you're sleep deprived or you have sleep debt, your brain prioritizes deep sleep or slow wave sleep. Also, the longer time you are awake prior to falling asleep tends to correlate with how much deep sleep you require. Even more, deep sleep is dependent on the daytime activity that you're doing, namely physical activity. If you're doing a lot of physical activity, your exercise during that day, this requires your body and brain to demand more deep sleep time at that following night. So if you're very active physically, you're gonna need more time to sleep to recover that deep sleep. Interestingly, the Kitamura study also found an increase in REM sleep as well as light recovery sleep when the participants were doing the sleep extension. So this makes sense because REM becomes increasingly more important towards the end of your night in sleeping. So repeatedly shortening your sleep, not sleeping enough, or having a bit of a sleep debt without actually knowing about it, can really start chipping in at that REM sleep. You're not getting that REM sleep opportunity. So just in general, does the daytime activity influence what type of sleep you need? And we've already seen that physical activity and exercise does increase your need of deep sleep. And it turns out there's also evidence where learning during the day requires further REM sleep. REM sleep is strongly associated with emotional and memory processing, and deep sleep tends to be associated with physical restoration and brain sort of showering, but you also dream when you're in deep sleep as well as in REM sleep. If you want to know more about dreams and sleeping, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments so I can do a deep dive on that. Learning has been associated with greater sleep spindle density. So in essence, I wouldn't say that a physical day is going to need deep sleep and a cognitively emotional day will require REM sleep. It's not that simple. But you see a bit of influence of that daytime activity, which therefore may mean that on that night you will require a longer sleep duration because that date's activity has been very demanding. Now let me tell you an anecdotal evidence, my own example. Sometimes if I have the freedom to sleep another 10 minutes in the morning, I tend to give myself a little post-sleep nap. So literally the alarm wakes me up, I stop it, I know I've got time, I add another 10 minutes nap. Many times I immediately go into vivid dreaming. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that I am in REM, because I mentioned dreaming can occur also in deep sleep, but because REM is concentrated towards the end of your sleep duration, this may be an example where my brain takes the opportunity to have a little REM rebound during that 10-minute nap. Now, for the extreme example, how many days can a human survive without sleeping? And there was a study in 1966 where Randy Gardner remained awake for approximately 11 days. That's 264 hours. There has been also some voluntary records that existed, apparently from Guinness World Records, but Guinness World Records stopped tracking these, luckily, because it's not at all good to do that, but apparently 19 days. So in essence, yes, humans are incredibly resilient and can survive with not a lot of sleep. So that explains when you're not sleeping much, you can still be functional, but that does not mean it's your optimal functionality. So in essence, how much sleep do you need? Start with the 7 to 9 hours. Then try out that formula, whichever is best. Figure out if you sleep longer in the weekends, how it differs from the weekday sleep hours, and put that together in the formula. This is not just a random formula. I estimated it from the science and from an app that I'm not going to mention here because I'm not sponsoring them and I'm not sponsored by them. But it's a decent account. That's how I figure out my own sleep needs. And so once you've done that formula, you can also start asking yourself, do I sleep longer when I don't have an alarm? Am I repeatedly getting longer weekend nights? And you can also try out this sleep extension experiment. What happens if I have unrestricted sleeping nights? And when does my sleep duration stabilize when I do this? So this stable sleep duration is the best estimate of your sleep duration. But we might not have the chance to book out a full week just to do a sleep retreat. If you guys do it, I'll do it. But we always have that. We want to travel, we see people, so you gotta balance one or the other. So once you've tested out the formula, even did the sleep extension intervention, you'll have a better idea of how much sleep you actually need. And you'll know that not everyone needs the same amount of sleeping. Also make sure that the time you spend in bed is mostly sleeping rather than being awake doing something else. That's something you have to maximize. And a little extra tip here, if you wake up in the middle of the night or can't fall asleep fast, get out of bed, lie on the floor, I tend to do that, or do something else relaxing, come back. Making sure your time in bed is mostly sleeping is a crucial aspect you have to aim for. Make sure to comment, like and subscribe. Tell me what you'd like to learn more about in the future. I love to read your comments and hear your suggestions. Now I have one last point, an extra point. If you've made it all the way up to here, you'll get this little extra point regarding the 40 hertz stimulation that Nick Norwitz talks about in his video. So he talks about this research that I go in more detail as well, where 40 hertz gamma stimulation has been shown to have promising results to support and treat Alzheimer's disease. So you can check out the science behind it, and you can also have a freely usable auditory stimulation that I created using the science, that 40 hertz stimulation. So you don't have to pay anything, you can listen to it for free. But here's something very important that Nick didn't make clear. He correctly reported the fact that there has been research showing that 40 hertz gamma stimulation improved sleep in Alzheimer's disease, and he mentioned that in his PhD he did Alzheimer's research and knows that dementia and Alzheimer's is worsened, or its risk increases when you are sleep deprived or not sleeping enough. And he made that connection and reported that. But this does not automatically make 40 hertz stimulation a bedtime sleep audio intervention. Just how exercise can also improve your sleep, that doesn't mean that every exercise intervention requires lights to be out. So it is true that there is research showing that 40 hertz gamma stimulation helps Alzheimer's disease sleep better, but the intervention was during the day. And if you want to learn more about sleep audio and music that's actually evidence-based, in other words, what can you listen to when you're falling asleep, subscribe to the channel, because that's my PhD, and watch this recommended video.